Welcome back. Now, after Don's report on BMW's R18 Cruiser that itself pays homage to the history of BMW bikes, I'm inspired to tell you about the most extraordinary museum that I visited a few weeks ago. And I do mean extraordinary, not just in the breadth and the depth of the bikes that it has on display, but also its location and even its structure. Somebody told us about it, and I thought, since it was called the Top Mountain Museum and I'm partial to a mountain and the roads that you find there, why not give it a go? So I did, and it's safe to say that I wasn't expecting what I found. I think I had images of a small dark barn on a hillside with a few dusty exhibits, but then after climbing slowly in our trusty old van for over an hour up the Timmelshock Pass to an altitude of 2,200 metres, we rounded a corner to be confronted with this. It's one of those rare buildings that genuinely makes you go, wow! It's wooden, but it's modern. It's sort of chalet-ish, but it's also swooping and curved. And it straddles the pass itself and has a viewpoint that hangs over the edge of the valley for spectacular vistas in every direction. It would make a fantastic lair for a Bond villain. I think it was €10 or so to get in, or about $200, and when I visited it, it had a special exhibition dedicated to the history of Indian motorcycles. There was some wonderful stuff in the main museum, from replicas of the first ever bikes to just about every significant model of all the major marques from the last 120 years or so, including some genuinely rare stuff and some fun exhibits like this early factory race truck complete with Grand Prix bike. There's far too much to show in this one story, so sometime in the future I'll give you a closer look at a few of the truly exceptional exhibits. In this episode, I just want to give you a flavour of this special museum and perhaps pick out a few bikes that really caught my attention. But before that, just take a look at the layout of the main exhibition space itself. Just a beautiful construction with nothing to obstruct your view of the bikes, and from one end a view outside to the main peaks that helped make the museum possible. It was constructed by twin brothers who are obviously mad keen bikers, and they also happen to run ski schools, hotels and ski lifts in the area, and they own the final part of the Timmelshock Mountain Pass, which is a toll road that goes up from the museum right up to another 300 metres further up the pass and crosses over into Italy at a 2,500 metre altitude. They even keep this thing open in winter. It's absolutely amazing. Obviously though, it's preferable to visit during the summer months, but when it's open it is a mecca for bikers because the road on both the Italian and the Austrian side of the mountains is a fantastic ride for bikes and cars. So, a bike museum on top of a mountain starts to make a bit of sense. On to some of the bikes though, and they had an amazing collection of really early English models, including all the usual big names like Brough and Triumph, AGS and the like. But there were also a few lesser known but equally interesting gems, a couple of which caught my eye. The first is this 108-year-old Humber from 1912 that is one of the very earliest examples of racing working as marketing. Win on Sunday, sell on Monday, applied to the success of this model, which followed on from Humber's 1911 Isle of Man Junior TT win. It was made in Beeston, Nottinghamshire, small village really in Nottinghamshire, the hometown of a certain Bill Hunter who occasionally presents on this programme. In fact, he'll be on in the next couple of weeks riding another interesting classic he's got his hands on. You can see that this motorcycle is not far removed from basically being a bicycle with an engine slotted into the frame. The 399cc V-twin makes amazing 3.5 horsepower, which is enough to scare you when the bicycle brakes aren't much better at slowing you down than the soles of your shoes. This next bike was made a decade later than that, in 1923, and was a 1 litre V-twin with side valves that made 18 horsepower from its JAP or JAP engine. JAP, by the way, wasn't a country reference. It stood for John Alfred Prestwich, who supplied engines to all the greats of the time, including the likes of Brough, Vincent and Triumph. The bike comes from New Imperial, who manufactured bicycles from the late 1880s in Birmingham before eventually adding engines in the early 1900s. This is a great looking bike and it's beautifully finished too. The sign of a company that in the 1920s was very successful and was pumping out around 300 bikes a month. Unfortunately, the 1930s depression wasn't kind to them, and after some failed attempts to keep the firm going, it eventually died off, like so many other famous British marques. And finally, how about this hugely advanced machine from 1934? You think perimeter alley frames and hub-centered steering are modern technology at its finest? Think again. This is a prototype built by a handful of British visionaries, but most notably a man by the name of Laurie Jenks, who had decided that motorcycling needed to move on from girder forks and tubular steel frames, so he came up with this. It's an all-aluminium riveted chassis with alley bodywork as well, and articulating rear suspension and a sort of duplex steering up front, which isn't too far removed from the hub-centered system you might see on a modern bimotor. The engine was a 600cc two-stroke, in reality a reconditioned Scott motor because they didn't have the funds to develop their own ideas. That meant it was a chassis which was from the future with an engine that was even then almost from the past. This radical design eventually resulted in 4 production examples, but lack of resources and an exorbitant cost meant this taste of the future never really had a chance. What a cool piece of engineering, and that's far from the only amazing bike that stops you in your tracks at this wonderful museum. If you're ever lucky enough to find yourself in Austria, perhaps in the city of Innsbruck, then just an hour and a half away down some breathtaking roads, you will find this little gem. Make the effort. I guarantee you will not regret it. Time for a short break. Back in a moment.